My girlfriend says I'm controlling for not wanting her work husband at family dinners. I'm sitting at my parents' dining table right now, watching my girlfriend Natalie laugh at something her coworker Trevor just said, and I'm trying to figure out when exactly my family dinners became his family dinners too. This is the fourth Sunday in a row that Trevor has been here. The fourth time I've had to watch him sit in the chair that used to be mine, next to Natalie, while I got pushed down to the far end near my teenage cousin, who won't stop talking about cryptocurrency. The fourth time my mom has asked me quietly in the kitchen why I brought my girlfriend's boyfriend to dinner, and I've had to explain that no, Trevor isn't her boyfriend, he's just her work husband, and yes, apparently that's something I'm supposed to be completely comfortable with. Natalie works in corporate event planning at a tech company downtown. Trevor is her direct supervisor, been there for 6 years, and according to Natalie, he's the best mentor she's ever had. They started working together 8 months ago when she got promoted to his team. Within weeks, she was coming home with Trevor's stories. Trevor taught her this negotiation technique. Trevor took her to lunch with a major client. Trevor stayed late to help her finish a proposal. It was nice at first. She was happy, thriving at work, learning from someone she respected. Then about 3 months ago, the language changed. She started calling him her work husband, not as a joke, but as an actual descriptor of their relationship. When I asked what that meant, Natalie explained that work spouses are completely normal in professional environments. They're the person you're closest to at the office, who you grab coffee with, who you vent to about difficult projects, who understands the daily grind in ways your actual partner can't, because they're not in that world. She said Trevor was her work husband the same way her desk was her work desk. Just a workplace designation, nothing romantic, nothing threatening. I tried to be understanding, tried to be the secure, modern boyfriend who doesn't get weird about his girlfriend having male friends. But then Trevor started appearing outside of work. First it was a happy hour that Natalie invited me to, where I met Trevor for the first time. He was 42, silver-haired, confident in that way successful corporate guys are. He shook my hand firmly, told me I was a lucky man, and then proceeded to have inside jokes with Natalie that I wasn't part of. Stories about their office, their clients, their daily experiences that I couldn't contribute to. I felt like a third wheel at my own girlfriend's work event. Then Natalie started suggesting Trevor join us for things. Dinner with friends, a concert she'd bought tickets for, a hiking trip. Each time I hesitated, she'd accuse me of being insecure, of not trusting her, of trying to control who she spent time with. She'd point out that I had female friends, and she never acted threatened, that work spouses are normal and healthy, and my discomfort revealed my own issues with modern professional relationships. The first Sunday dinner happened a month ago. Natalie mentioned casually that Trevor was in town alone that weekend. His wife and kids had gone to visit her parents, and wouldn't it be nice to invite him to my family dinner so he didn't have to eat alone? I said I'd prefer to keep family dinners just family. She looked at me like I'd said something cruel. You want him to be alone on a Sunday just because you're weird about our friendship? That's pretty selfish. When I tried to explain that it wasn't about leaving him alone, it was about maintaining some boundaries between her work life and our personal life. She got upset, said boundaries shouldn't mean exclusion, that I was drawing arbitrary lines to make her choose between people she cared about, that if I really loved her, I'd want to include important people in her life rather than gatekeep our relationships. The language was so sophisticated, so reasonable sounding, that I started doubting myself. Was I being controlling? Was this a normal discomfort that I needed to get over? My friends were split when I asked them. Half said I was overreacting, that work spouses are totally normal and I needed to chill. The other half said something felt off but couldn't articulate exactly what. So when Natalie asked again the following week, I said yes. Trevor could come to Sunday dinner. That first dinner was uncomfortable but not terrible. Trevor was charming with my parents, brought expensive wine, complimented my mom's cooking. He and Natalie sat together, naturally gravitating toward each other, finishing each other's sentences, sharing knowing looks when someone made a joke, only they understood. My dad pulled me aside while clearing dishes and asked if I was okay with this situation. I said I was trying to be. He looked at me with that expression dads get when they know you're lying to yourself, but can't force you to see it. Just be careful, he said. Some things look innocent until you realize they're not. The second Sunday, Trevor brought gifts. A special olive oil for my mom who'd mentioned she liked cooking Italian food. A book on vintage cars for my dad who restores them as a hobby. He'd paid attention during the first dinner, remembered details, positioned himself as thoughtful and considerate. My family loved him. After dinner, my mom actually told me she understood why Natalie valued him so much. He's wonderful, she said, so attentive. I wanted to scream that yes, he was attentive to winning over my family, but instead, I smiled and nodded. That night, Natalie and I got into our first real fight about Trevor. I told her I was uncomfortable with how often he was integrating into our personal life. She said I was being possessive and insecure, that Trevor was just a friend, and the fact that I couldn't handle her having a close male friend revealed deep-seated trust issues I needed to work on. Every concern I raised got reframed as a personal failing. I didn't like how much time they spent together. I was clingy. I felt weird about the work husband label. I was old-fashioned and sexist. I wanted some activities to be just us. I was isolating her from meaningful friendships. She told me her therapist had said it was healthy for partners to have strong friendships outside the relationship. That codependency was toxic, and I seemed to want her entire social world to revolve around me. When I pointed out that I wasn't asking her to eliminate friendships, just to maintain some boundaries with her male supervisor, she accused me of gendering the issue. Would you care this much if Trevor was a woman? The answer was no, obviously, but explaining why felt impossible without sounding exactly like the controlling boyfriend she was accusing me of being. By the third Sunday, I'd stopped protesting. Trevor was just there, expected, part of the routine. He'd started bringing his own contributions to dinner, coordinating with my mom about dishes. They'd text during the week about recipes. He was embedding himself into my family structure, and everyone seemed fine with it except me. My younger sister asked me privately why I'd let my girlfriend bring her boyfriend to family dinners. I told her Trevor wasn't Natalie's boyfriend, and she laughed. Right. Because that's exactly how you act with someone who's not your boyfriend. She told me she'd noticed the way Trevor looked at Natalie when she wasn't watching. Like he was cataloging her, studying her, planning something. But whenever Natalie looked at him, his expression was perfectly friendly and professional. My sister thought he was performing for everyone, showing us what we wanted to see while hiding his real intentions. I started paying closer attention, watched how Trevor positioned himself always next to Natalie, how he'd touch her arm when making a point, how he'd lean in close to whisper jokes that made her laugh. Small touches, brief moments, nothing overtly inappropriate but constant and intentional, building a physical familiarity that felt intimate regardless of what they claimed it meant. After the third dinner, I asked Natalie directly if something was going on between her and Trevor. The explosion was immediate and massive. How dare I? How dare I accuse her of cheating when she'd been nothing but transparent? How dare I imply she'd bring someone she was romantically involved with to meet my family? My accusation proved everything Trevor had been saying about me, that I was insecure and controlling and not ready for an adult relationship. When I asked what Trevor had been saying about me, she hesitated, then said they'd discussed my jealousy issues, that Trevor had noticed my discomfort and suggested Natalie consider whether I was emotionally mature enough to handle her professional success and the relationships that came with it, whether I was holding her back. My girlfriend's boss had been analyzing me, judging my worthiness, and reporting his conclusions to her like he had any right to evaluate our relationship. And Natalie had been listening, agreeing, using his assessment as evidence against me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay awake, scrolling through Natalie's Instagram, looking at the photos she'd been posting lately, dozens of pictures with Trevor, at work events, at coffee shops, at restaurants, at the gym they'd apparently started going to together. Her captions called him her work husband proudly, tagged him in posts about great partnerships and professional soulmates. The comments were telling. Friends asking if that was her boyfriend, co-workers making jokes about them being married, Natalie responding with laughing emojis, but never correcting anyone, never clarifying that she had an actual boyfriend who wasn't Trevor. I looked like the side piece in my own relationship. The next morning, I did something I'm not proud of. I created a fake LinkedIn profile and started researching Trevor. His work history was impressive, but there were gaps. 3 years ago, he'd left a previous company abruptly. Before that, another gap. I couldn't find details, but the pattern was there. Something had happened that wasn't on his official resume. I paid for a professional background check service. Felt gross doing it, invasive and paranoid, but I needed to know who this man was who'd inserted himself so completely into my life. The report came back with information that made my stomach drop. Trevor had been named in a workplace harassment complaint 5 years ago at his previous company. A female employee had accused him of inappropriate pursuit, boundary violations, and using his supervisory position to pressure her into a personal relationship. The case had been settled quietly, Trevor had resigned, and he'd moved to his current company with a clean record because the settlement included non-disclosure agreements. The woman's name was sealed, but the basic facts were there. Trevor had a history of pursuing subordinates, of using his professional authority to blur boundaries, of targeting women who worked under him and convincing them that the relationship was mutual and appropriate, while systematically isolating them from their partners and support systems. I showed Natalie the background check that evening. She looked at the documents for maybe 30 seconds before pushing them away. "This is psychotic," she said. "You hired someone to investigate Trevor because you can't handle me having a male friend? This is exactly the controlling behavior he warned me about." I tried to explain that this wasn't about jealousy, this was about her safety. Trevor had done this before, had a documented pattern of pursuing employees, and she needed to see that what was happening wasn't friendship, it was grooming. She said grooming was a word used to describe manipulation of children, and infantilizing her by suggesting she couldn't recognize her own feelings was deeply insulting. That the background check proved I didn't trust her judgment, that I was so desperate to be right, that I'd invented a conspiracy theory about her mentor rather than accepting that he was just a good person who cared about her professional development. Every fact I presented got reframed as evidence of my dysfunction. The harassment complaint? Probably a bitter employee angry about being held accountable. The gaps in employment? Normal career moves? The way he'd integrated into our lives? Just him being friendly and me being paranoid? Natalie said she'd talked to Trevor about my jealousy, and he'd been incredibly understanding. He'd suggested she set boundaries with me about my controlling behavior before it escalated further. That the fact that I'd hired an investigator was a massive red flag she needed to take seriously. My girlfriend was taking relationship advice about me from the man I was warning her about, and she couldn't see how perfectly he'd positioned himself as the reasonable one while painting me as unstable. That weekend was the fourth Sunday dinner. I decided to go along with it, smile and nod, play the role of the understanding boyfriend while I figured out what to do. I watched Trevor work the room, charming my parents, making my sister laugh, helping my mom in the kitchen. Watched him sit next to Natalie, their shoulders touching, sharing food off each other's plates, existing in a bubble of intimacy that everyone could see but no one acknowledged. During dinner, Trevor announced he had exciting news. He'd been offered a promotion to regional director, which meant he'd be managing multiple teams across several offices. He'd recommended Natalie to take over his current position as senior event director. She'd be promoted, significant raise, her own team. Everyone congratulated them, celebrated this professional milestone. Then Trevor dropped the real news. The new role meant more travel for both of them. They'd be on the road together frequently, attending conferences, meeting with clients across the country, sometimes for weeks at a time. My mom asked if I'd be okay with Natalie traveling so much for work. Before I could answer, Trevor jumped in. He said I'd been very supportive of Natalie's career growth, that it took a secure man to encourage his partner's success, even when it meant sacrifice. He was speaking for me, defining my reaction, telling my own family how I felt about my girlfriend traveling extensively with her male supervisor. I smiled and said nothing, because anything I said would make me look exactly like the insecure, controlling boyfriend they all thought I was worried about becoming. After dinner, Natalie pulled me aside and said she needed to talk. Her expression was serious in a way that made my chest tight. She said the promotion was huge for her career, but she needed to know I'd support it. That the travel with Trevor was non-negotiable, it was part of the job, and if I had a problem with it, she needed to know now. I asked if she could understand why I might be uncomfortable with her spending weeks at a time alone with a man who'd been accused of workplace harassment, who'd systematically integrated himself into every aspect of her life, who she'd given a label typically reserved for romantic partners. She said the harassment thing was unproven, and I was using it as an excuse. That work husband was a professional term I was sexualizing. That my discomfort was my problem to solve, not hers to accommodate. She'd already accepted the promotion, already committed to the travel, already chosen Trevor's vision for her career over any concerns I had. She was telling me, not asking me. That night, I called my best friend Adrian. He's a corporate lawyer, deals with employment cases, and I needed someone who understood workplace dynamics. I explained the situation and asked if I was crazy for being concerned. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, then said I needed to report this to Trevor's company immediately. That what I was describing sounded like a textbook case of supervisory misconduct. That Trevor recommending Natalie for a promotion that would require extensive travel alone with him was a massive conflict of interest and potential abuse of power. That most companies have policies specifically prohibiting supervisors from making personnel decisions about employees they're romantically involved with, and Trevor was creating a situation that looked exactly like he was using his authority to isolate Natalie and increase their time together. Adrian said even if Natalie didn't see it as romantic, Trevor's history suggested he did. That the harassment complaint, the integration into personal life, the travel arrangement, these weren't coincidences. This was a pattern, and I needed to protect Natalie, even if she was angry at me for it. The next morning, I called the HR department at Natalie's company, said I was a concerned party with information about a potential supervisory relationship issue. They took my information seriously, asked detailed questions, and said they'd investigate. Then I made a mistake. I told Natalie what I'd done. I thought being honest was the right move, thought she deserved to know, thought maybe seeing her company take it seriously would help her recognize the problem. Instead, she looked at me with pure fury and said I'd just destroyed her career, that I'd reported her mentor for harassment based on paranoid jealousy, that HR investigations meant scrutiny of both parties, that her promotion would be delayed or canceled, that her professional reputation would be damaged because her boyfriend couldn't handle her success, that I'd proven Trevor right about me being controlling, and now everyone at her office would know it too. She packed a bag and left, said she was staying with her friend Rachel until I could get my behavior under control, that she needed space from someone who'd sabotage her career out of insecurity. I tried to explain I was protecting her, but she was gone before I finished the sentence. For 3 days, I didn't hear from her. Her social media went quiet. She didn't respond to texts or calls. I was losing my mind imagining where she was, who she was with, whether Trevor was using my HR report as proof of my toxicity and pushing her further away. Finally, Rachel called me. She said I needed to come over immediately, that there was something I needed to see. When I got to Rachel's apartment, Natalie wasn't there. Rachel looked upset, conflicted, like she was breaking some kind of code. She told me Natalie had been staying with her like I thought, but the previous night, Trevor had shown up at the apartment. He told Natalie that HR had put him on administrative leave pending investigation, that my report had triggered a full review of their working relationship, and that he needed her to make a statement to HR confirming that their relationship was purely professional and that I was a jealous boyfriend making false accusations. Rachel said she'd overheard the conversation through the bedroom door, heard Trevor coaching Natalie on exactly what to say to HR, exactly how to frame their relationship, exactly how to make me look unstable. But then his tone had shifted. He'd told Natalie that the investigation was actually an opportunity, that if she supported him through this, if she stood by him and helped clear his name, he'd make sure she got not just the promotion they'd discussed, but even better opportunities, that they'd be bound together professionally now, that this adversity would strengthen their partnership, that she needed to choose clearly whether she was on his side or mine. Rachel said the way Trevor spoke, the possessiveness in his voice, made her skin crawl, and when Natalie hesitated, when she'd said she needed time to think, Trevor had said something that changed everything. He'd said he'd been patient, had respected her relationship with me even though it pained him, had waited for her to see clearly that what they had was more than professional, that he'd been in love with her since the day she joined his team, that every moment they'd spent together, every dinner, every work trip, every inside joke, he'd been courting her, building a foundation, waiting for her to realize that the connection they had was deeper than anything she had with me. Rachel said Natalie had frozen, asked Trevor what he was talking about, and Trevor had confessed everything, that the work husband label wasn't casual for him, it was aspirational, that he'd been planning for months to create situations where they'd be together more, where I'd look bad by comparison, where she'd gradually see him as the better partner, that the promotion and travel arrangement wasn't about her career, it was about removing me from the equation, about having her to himself for weeks at a time until she forgot why she'd chosen me in the first place. Rachel said Natalie had told Trevor to leave, that she'd clearly stated she wasn't interested, that she was committed to me, that he'd misread their entire relationship, and Trevor had gotten angry, had said she was confused, that I'd manipulated her into doubting her own feelings, that she'd been sending him signals for months and was now backing out because of my HR stunt, that he'd sacrificed his professional reputation to promote her and she owed him more than rejection. The entitlement, the rage, the complete disregard for Natalie's stated feelings, Rachel said it was terrifying. She'd called the police when Trevor refused to leave. He'd eventually gone, but not before telling Natalie that she'd regret choosing me over him, that he'd make sure her career at the company was finished, that the HR investigation would reveal her complicity in whatever they decided he'd done wrong, and she'd be fired alongside him. Rachel had all of this recorded on her phone. She'd started recording when Trevor's tone shifted, instinct telling her to document whatever was happening. She had audio of Trevor's confession, his threats, his refusal to accept Natalie's rejection, evidence that he'd been manipulating the situation from the beginning. "Where is Natalie now?" I asked. Rachel said she'd left early that morning, wouldn't say where she was going, just that she needed to think. Rachel gave me her phone to listen to the recording. Hearing Trevor's voice, so different from his charming dinner persona, made me want to break something. He'd been playing a long game, positioning himself deliberately, isolating Natalie systematically, and I'd been watching it happen while being told I was the problem. I needed to find Natalie, called her repeatedly, sent desperate texts, drove to every place I thought she might be. Nothing. 6 hours later, she finally responded. A single text. "I'm at the police station. Come now." I got there in 15 minutes. Found Natalie in a conference room with 2 detectives and a woman from the district attorney's office. She'd been filing a formal complaint against Trevor, not just for the threatening behavior at Rachel's apartment, but for months of harassment, manipulation, and abuse of his supervisory position. When she saw me, she broke down crying. "I'm so sorry," she said. "You were right. About everything. You tried to warn me, and I thought you were controlling when you were just trying to protect me." The lead detective, Officer Mendez, explained that they'd already contacted Trevor's company. The HR investigation I'd triggered had uncovered multiple complaints from other employees. Turns out Trevor had a pattern spanning his entire tenure at the company, not just the harassment case from his previous job. At least 4 other women had reported uncomfortable behavior, boundary violations, inappropriate comments about their personal relationships, and pressure to spend time with him outside of work. HR had been documenting everything quietly, building a case, and my report had been the final piece that pushed them to act. Trevor had been terminated that morning, not suspended, fired, for serial harassment, abuse of supervisory authority, and creating a hostile work environment for multiple employees. The district attorney's representative said they were considering charges. Trevor's behavior met the legal definition of stalking and harassment. His presence at Rachel's apartment, his threats against Natalie's career, his refusal to leave when asked, all criminal. Combined with the pattern of behavior across multiple victims, they felt they had a strong case. They asked if I'd be willing to testify about Trevor's integration into our personal life, the way he'd systematically positioned himself to isolate Natalie from me. I agreed immediately. Over the next week, the story got bigger. The company's investigation revealed Trevor had been manipulating personnel decisions for years, promoting women he was interested in, traveling with them extensively, then retaliating professionally when they rejected his advances or left the company. He destroyed at least 3 careers that they could document. The harassment settlement from his previous job was just the tip of the iceberg. 7 women came forward with similar stories, different details, same pattern. Trevor would identify a younger female employee, position himself as a mentor, gradually escalate the relationship while framing her partner as controlling or unsupportive, then reveal his romantic intentions once he'd isolated her sufficiently. Some women had rejected him immediately and faced career consequences. Others had been convinced to leave their relationships, only to discover Trevor lost interest once the chase was over. One woman, Lauren, had been in Natalie's exact position 2 years earlier. Trevor had called himself her work husband, integrated into her family dinners, gotten her promoted to a position requiring extensive travel with him. She'd left her boyfriend of 5 years, thinking she and Trevor had a deep connection. The moment she was single, Trevor became distant and cold, told her he'd been helping her see that her relationship was holding her back, but he wasn't interested in dating her. She'd been a project for him, an ego boost, a woman he could control and discard. Lauren had eventually left the company, devastated and confused. She'd spent 2 years in therapy processing what had happened, understanding that she'd been manipulated by someone who viewed her as a challenge rather than a person. When she heard about Trevor's firing, she contacted the company with her story, wanted to make sure other women knew they weren't alone, weren't crazy, hadn't imagined the manipulation. Natalie met with Lauren, heard the identical pattern, saw her own future if I hadn't fought back, if Rachel hadn't recorded the confession, if Trevor had successfully isolated her. Lauren told Natalie that the work husband label was Trevor's signature move. He'd learned that calling himself that made women defensive when their partners objected, made them feel like their relationship was being sexualized and controlled when really they were being groomed. The term provided cover for increasingly intimate behavior while making anyone who objected look insecure and regressive. Natalie had been a textbook case. The company offered her a promotion, different department, no reporting to anyone involved in the Trevor situation, a significant raise, formal apology from executive leadership, and paid therapy sessions to process the manipulation she'd endured. They also implemented new policies about supervisory relationships, mandatory harassment training, and oversight of personnel decisions to prevent future abuse of power. Trevor, meanwhile, was arrested, charged with stalking, criminal harassment, and intimidation. His bail was set high because the judge viewed him as a potential threat to multiple women. He couldn't contact any of the victims, couldn't go near Natalie's workplace or home, was fitted with an ankle monitor. His professional reputation was destroyed. Articles in business publications about the case, his name permanently tied to the scandal. The LinkedIn profile that had looked so impressive was now evidence of a career built on manipulating vulnerable employees. During Trevor's trial, I testified about the systematic way he'd infiltrated our relationship, the Sunday dinners, the gifts for my family, the coaching he'd done with Natalie about my jealousy. The prosecutor used my testimony to establish Trevor's pattern of isolating women from their support systems. The recording Rachel had made was played in court. Trevor's own voice, threatening and entitled and possessive, destroyed any pretense that his intentions had been professional or innocent. He was convicted on multiple counts, sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years probation, required to register as a harasser in the workplace database that some industries maintain, permanently barred from supervisory positions in any company. His career, his reputation, his ability to hurt other women, gone. Natalie and I went to therapy, couples counseling with a specialist in manipulation and coercive control. We had to rebuild trust that Trevor had deliberately destroyed. Natalie had to process the guilt of not listening to me, of choosing her abuser over her partner, of needing Rachel's recording to believe what I'd been saying for months. I had to work through the anger of being gaslit, of being made to feel crazy and controlling when I'd been right all along. Some days were harder than others. Natalie would see something that reminded her of Trevor, a restaurant they'd gone to, a phrase he'd used, and spiral into shame. I'd sometimes struggle with resentment that she'd needed third-party validation to trust my instincts, but we worked through it, learned that manipulation is powerful, that victims aren't weak or stupid, that Trevor had been playing a game we didn't know existed. 6 months after Trevor's conviction, my family had a Sunday dinner. Just us and Natalie. No co-workers, no supervisors, no work spouses. My mom made her famous lasagna. My dad told stories about his latest car restoration. My sister showed us her college acceptance letters, and Natalie held my hand under the table, squeezed it gently, silently thanking me for fighting for us when she couldn't see clearly. Later, at home, Natalie showed me her phone, an email from Lauren, the woman who'd been through the same thing. She'd started a support group for women who'd experienced workplace manipulation and romantic coercion by supervisors. Wanted to help others recognize the signs, validate their experiences, provide resources for reporting and recovery. Natalie had joined, was sharing her story to help other women avoid the trap she'd fallen into. My girlfriend, who'd once defended her work husband to the point of leaving me, was now warning others about men who used that exact terminology to groom and control. The term work husband has been banned at her company, added to their list of inappropriate workplace language because of how Trevor weaponized it. That night, Natalie and I sat on our couch, scrolling through her Instagram. She'd deleted every photo with Trevor, every caption that called him her work husband, every post that made it look like he was her actual partner. The gap where those posts used to be represented months of our lives, stolen by someone who thought he had the right to insert himself between us and call it mentorship. But we'd survived. Trevor was in prison where he belonged. Natalie had a successful career built on her own merit rather than his manipulation. And Sunday dinners were ours again. Just family. No predators allowed. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.